Today's classic interview is sort of a preview of a really good interview that we're going to have for you next week. A couple years ago, I interviewed Chris Shelton, who was a high-level Scientologist, and he held nothing back. He told all. And the reason I'm going back to this interview today is that next week we will be doing a very interesting interview with Ron Miscavige. And if the last name Miscavige rings a bell, it should, because he is the father of David Miscavige, a friend of Tom Cruise and current leader of the Church of Scientology. His father, Ron Miscavige, will join me next week for what I think will be a tremendously interesting interview. And to get ready for that, to get in the mindset, we're going to go back to my February of 2016 interview with Chris Shelton. I'm joined today by Chris Shelton, who's a former high-level Scientologist. He was a Scientologist for 27 years. He's the author of the recent book, Scientology A to Xenu, an insider's guide to what Scientology is really all about. Love the title of the book. So tell me, how did you get into Scientology? I mean, was it through your parents? Were you a second generation Scientologist?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I am a second generation. My parents got involved when I was about 4 years old.
And what was the earliest memory, or what are your earliest memories of Scientology?
My earliest memories actually are hanging out at the Pasadena organization back in the 70s, growing up, and doing some classes, doing some children's type classes, communication courses, and things like that. It didn't make any sense to me. It was pretty confusing stuff at the time.
So I was going to say, like, what are children taught? Like, at what types of things are taught to kids who are in Scientology?
Well, you're raised with the lingo, of course, and some of the basic concepts of it in terms of, you're a spirit and that sort of thing. But classes-wise, they have children's communications course, and they have children's study courses and things like that.
And when you, well, I guess for people who aren't already sort of initiated into this, talk a little bit about the levels of Scientology, and then talk to us a little bit about what level you got to and sort of what that means.
Sure. Scientology promises a sort of personal spiritual immortality and personal freedom is how they call it, right? A sort of a godhood or, apotheosis sort of thing. And they have this divided into levels of services that you do as you climb this bridge to total freedom, they call it. And, you're sort of crossing from this, horrible existence on earth to this wonderful spiritual immortality sort of thing. And along the way are all these different levels through the counseling they offer. The first milestone being what's called the state of clear. And this was something described in Dianetics. This is old, back to 1950, before, predates Scientology, which is, sort of a full release from all psychoses and neuroses and things in your mind that are affecting you from past traumatic experiences and whatnot. And I have to just say up front, it'd be wonderful if these things really existed, but they don't. So, but this is how they describe it. So first you have clear, and then above that are these higher levels of spiritual awareness and ability, which are called operating thetan levels, or OT levels, thetan being the Scientology word for a spiritual being. They don't call it a soul or a spirit, they call it a thetan. So you have these levels that you go through, and that's where the Xenu story, for example, comes in, is at OT level 3. And there are 8 released OT levels in Scientology.
And to what level were you able to ascend?
I got to the state of clear, but like many, many, many Scientologists, that was achieved and then taken away, because there was, about 3 or 4 times now they've done these reviews where they say, oh yeah, no, you didn't really make it, and so now you're required to pay more money because we, didn't actually get it done properly, and you're going to pay to redo services you've already done because you didn't really achieve it. So I got clear.
Ballpark for me, if you can. What is the cost, average, right, to get to the clear level? What do people more or less pay by the time they've gotten to that point?
Generally speaking, $125,000.
Okay, and that might be over a
All
period of how many years?
Oh, that could be as fast as you want it to go, but well, at least a year. I mean, at least that. But generally speaking, people take years to get to the state of clear because it costs a lot of money and it takes a lot of time. And especially over the last 20 years or so, they've really been milking people. So it could be upwards of $200,000. And that's between, donations as well as the counseling you're paying for. They make you buy Hubbard's lectures and listen to them and his books, and you have to read them. And there's a lot of costs involved in Scientology that are sort of hidden costs that you don't know about until you become part of the system. They hit you up for money all the time.
In your heart of hearts, when you were really in this, right? Did you literally believe all of the teachings of Scientology? I mean, L. Ron Hubbard, I've read about him talking about his trips to Venus and Mars, I believe. And, we know about the I forget even the age of the universe under the teachings of Scientology, but it's just an outrageous number. Did you truly believe that, or did you always have some sort of doubts about those stories?
No, I was a true believer for many years. It was very easy for me to be a science denier
Hmm.
because you believe L. Ron Hubbard. You believe what he says. And he, castigates science and physics and everything really that disagrees with him. And he claims to be the only one who have discovered these truths about life. And you go, okay, well, there's a certain degree of plausibility that somebody could discover something that nobody else knows and then share his work. So you go, okay, you give a little bit and you give a little bit and you give a little bit. And then really what happens is before you really have thought the whole thing through after months and years of this, you're accepting things as true that are absolutely ludicrous that on day one you never would have accepted. But as you've progressed through this belief system and accepted Hubbard's authority on things, you find yourself believing things like, the universe being, trillions and upon trillions of years
Right.
old, and he could travel spiritually to Venus and Mars and things like that.
There are so many allegations of assault and abuse and violence in the Sea Org, where you ultimately within which you worked ultimately. Were you ever
Yes,
assaulted?
yes, I was.
Can you
I
talk
was
a
not
little bit about
I
that?
was not assaulted. I'm sorry. Yeah, I was not assaulted by David Miscavige personally. It was one of his juniors who did it. And there's a lot of physical abuse, not just physical assault, like directly somebody hitting you, but there's, much overwork, sleep deprivation. The Sea Organization is Scientology's clergy. It's the core group of Scientology that are working 24/7, and it's a paramilitary group. So there's ranks and ratings, and people are saying sir and saluting and all that. And there was a period of a week one time where we were working on a particular project where I got about 3 hours sleep over a 5-day period. It's an intensely dedicated group, but they take it way too far in how hard they're worked for the cause. And there's a lot of burnout, a lot of people, just crash and burn and end up leaving. And and at one point, I was in a high intensity situation where somebody, the senior person to me, got very, very, very upset with me over something I didn't even do wrong. That was what was really so unjust about the whole thing. And she ended up, beating me in front of a room full of people to make her point that she was very upset with me. She shook me, grabbed me, and beat me.
And is it sort of understood that you can't retaliate in a situation like that?
Oh, very much so. If had I done anything other than accept it, I would have instantly been sent to Scientology's Rehabilitation Project Force, or the RPF. And ironically, I ended up there anyway years later. But that would definitely have been the consequences of me retaliating or speaking back or even complaining later to somebody else, even after things had chilled out. If I had gone and said this was wrong and shouldn't have happened and all that, she was in such a position that it would have been unquestionable. It would be unthinkable to have said anything against her.
You recruited more than 10 people. The exact number offhand, I don't remember, but I think it was somewhere between 10 and 12 people to the Sea Org. Question one,
Yes.
are any of those people still part of the Sea Org? And two, do you feel guilty for having recruited those individuals?
I don't know for sure. I know some of them left before I did. I don't know if all of them are still in or not. And guilty, yeah, I guess I do. I certainly am not happy about it. I wish I, of course, at the time was not doing it out of malice or because I thought I was part of a con job. I honestly believe that what we were doing was truly making a difference and was truly going to save the world. Those are the words I would have used. And in fact, those are the words I did use to recruit people. So I was a fervent believer at that point. But I'm looking back on it. Yeah, I'm regretful about it. I wish I hadn't done that.
I'm going to remind everybody Chris Shelton's book is Scientology A to Xenu, an insider's guide to what Scientology is really all about. Let's take a break on our TV and radio show. We're going to continue a little bit longer with Chris Shelton and talk about SP, Suppressive Persons. The full interview will be on our YouTube channel. So, Chris, let's talk a little bit about, as I mentioned, suppressive persons. You know, my mom at one point inadvertently hired a Scientologist handyman, and I was sort of left to monitor his work when she was on vacation. And he started talking to me about Scientology. And initially, I thought he was sort of bringing it up to sort of make fun of it with me or poke fun in some way. And it became clear immediately when I said, oh, yeah, that's the religion based on that science fiction guy's books, right? Sort of innocently. He very quickly went and talked to me about how, no, people who believe that are suppressive. And of course, I now realize, more than 10 years later, he was referring to suppressive persons. So explain to our audience sort of what that status is and what that means.
Yeah, suppressive persons were originally kind of formulated by Hubbard in the 60s as the antisocial personality, and they were presented as the kind of person or the kind of personality that you would read about in The Sociopath Next Door. You know, like a really bad person, a Christie or a Hitler or a Napoleon are some of the examples Hubbard gave, and of course those people exist, and it's very easy to see in history and in the news that such personalities exist. However, over the next few years, what happened was that label of calling somebody a suppressive person started taking on sort of internal political and control overtones, where if somebody started speaking out against Hubbard, they were automatically, obviously psychotic and nuts, because look at what Hubbard was and how great he was. And so this label of a suppressive person started being used as a control mechanism within the Church of Scientology. And if you were labeled a suppressive person, Scientologists assume you must have done something to deserve it. And because the church, of course, would never do this to control people, right? And so they just accept that if you're declared or labeled a suppressive person, you have done bad things, and they don't even need to know all the specifics of it. Originally, it was written on a piece of yellow or goldenrod paper. Your name, suppressive person declare, and Chris Shelton is hereby declared a suppressive person because he did X, X, Y, Y, and Z, Z. And they would post these up on notice boards, and everybody would know that they needed to break contact with you forever. You were persona non grata. And this includes family, friends, business associates, everybody.
If yeah, this sounds like at in New York City in parking garages around holiday time, they put up a board and they thank people who have tipped. And so it's sort of like a board of shame. If your name's not on the board, people are, I guess, supposed to think less of you. This is sort of the opposite. They put up on the board the names of the people that are suppressive. What had you done to be labeled as such?
I was labeled a suppressive person because I simply spoke my mind. I posted on the internet that I had disagreements with Scientology. I had had just a very long series of bad experiences with Scientology because they were persecuting me. And then they, as a result of that, they declared me a suppressive person. It was really simply exercising my First Amendment rights. You don't You don't really have those rights in Scientology. They say you do, but you don't. Not if you direct that criticism towards the church or its leaders. And I, lost my fiance. I lost friends I'd had for 20 years overnight, all gone. And that was quite devastating. And it's a tool the church wields to control its members and keep them in line.
Yeah, we've spoken to Marty Rathbun, Claire Headley, and Lori Hodson, and they've all sort of told their story of leaving and of separation and described it similarly to how you're talking about it. Were you able
Yeah.
to leave in a simple way, or was it even difficult for you to leave the Sea Org and Scientology?
It took me 9 months to what they call route out or leave the Sea organization because I didn't want to work for them anymore. But I still wanted to be a Scientologist at that point. This was in 2012. I was kind of, okay, I'm done working for this group. It's, I'm not really achieving my goals personally. I'm not happy. So after 17 years of working for the Sea Org, I said, okay, enough's enough. I want to quit. I went through the whole process you have to do that. And in December 2012, I was no longer a Sea Org member, but I was still a Scientologist. I started being persecuted because what I didn't realize is that as an ex-Sea Org member, you're the lowest of the low. You're treated as a third-class citizen. You are, sort of like back of the line. We don't want you around, that sort of thing. And yet I was trying to make a go of it as a Scientologist, as a public Scientologist now. I was going to pay for my services. I wanted to, take part of all the goods that I'd been, getting other people for all those years. And then they weren't going to have any part of that. And it got me looking more deeply into what is this really all about, that I'm being treated this way. And that's when I got on the internet. And that's when I went down the rabbit hole and found out all about all the lies that Hubbard and Scientology are actually all about. And it took me about 3 months to get through a lot of that and really delve in and get the facts of the matter. And I was so upset. I mean, there really aren't words to describe how upset I was after spending 27 years of my life doing this and finding out it was all, So I started speaking out, and shortly thereafter, I lost all Scientology connections, and I was declared a suppressive person.
Last thing I want to touch on in the very limited time we have left, since the book came out, have there been repercussions, threats, contact with Scientologists?
Not directly. There have been some indirect communications sent my way that indicated to me that they're keeping an eye on me. And, I have mixed feelings about it. It's not unexpected. I've been a pretty vocal advocate and critic, and I intend on continuing that. What that really tells me is, of course, that my book is the truth, and they don't like it, and that people should read it.
Well, I'll mention once more, the book is Scientology A to Xenu, an insider's guide to what Scientology is really all about. We've been speaking with the book's author, Chris Shelton. Chris, thanks so much for sharing your story.
Absolutely. Thank you. And they can find the book on Amazon, by the way.